Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, welcome once again, my friends, to Syntax Error. I, of course, am Scott Thurlow, with Jane Manzer.
Hello.
And Stephen Amosi.
Hey there.
And if you're in any way, shape, or form involved in video games or have any knowledge of it, you might know that E3 2017 just happened earlier this week. In fact, I think they're like rounding up, closing up some of it tonight as we record this. Although not much is happening usually, but the big stuff's already happened, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we sort of decided to cut up sort of beats, if you will. If we were there in person, I'd be covering the big AAA stuff. Ian would be talking about any VR and VR-related things that came out of E3, and Stevo would be covering the indie and indie-related games and so forth in that. So I'll kick off, and also, to be fair, I'll admit that this is going to be somewhat of a biased coverage of E3 because we're not going to cover every goddamn thing that was announced or shown or teased. Just some of the big stuff from the big developers that I like, and amongst that, the stuff that I enjoy. So
That's good.
I'll kick it off. A ghost just appeared. A teaser from next season. But I'll kick it off with one of the developers that's sort of near and dear to my heart, and probably your guys, Bethesda. They were one of the first presentations. So here's what came out of their what they showed off. First, Wolfenstein, New Colossus, awesome. The New Order was great. I'm glad they're doing a sequel. If it's anything like the New Order, it should be just a great, interesting first-person shooter within a Nazi-controlled alternate reality. With interesting characters. Side characters really well written. Dialogue was really well written in that one. Secondly, something I was somewhat hoping for. It's not Dishonored 2 DLC. It's basically a standalone called Death of the Outsider. But it should close off that sort of story. You'll play Dowd again, I believe, and Billy Lurk. So that's pretty cool. Other big thing is they're going to have Skyrim on Nintendo Switch. That's kind of a surprise. No one really was expecting that. But it's cool. I think it'll have some different have amiibo support first of all, and a couple other features. And the last thing they announced was Evil Within 2, and in my notes I have cool ? I thought Evil Within was okay, and maybe it's just enough to get me to check out 2, but they did announce it, so there you go. And speaking of that, somewhat Nintendo again. I'm no longer the biggest Nintendo fan in the world, but I will give you what the major things that they came out that I actually cared about or would care about if I had one. First off is Metroid Prime 4 for Switch, which that looks actually pretty good. I saw a bit of the trailer for that. Looked pretty solid. Metroid, of course, is one of the things they can mine for money, always pretty much. But given that, still seems fine. Other big thing, aside from the Skyrim for Switch, is that there are 2 Breath of the Wild DLCs coming out for Legend of Zelda. And I know fans were sort of not clamoring for it, but Breath of the Wild was so highly touted that they were yeah, well, here's some more of it.
Yeah. I think those were already planned, right? But they hadn't said kind of what they were.
They basically showed off what they were going to be. So it's sort of I think Hero of the Trials or Trial of the Hero, however you want to phrase it, is one of them.
I assume
it's something like that. I think
they'll phrase it for
from
you.
what I understand, it changes up the difficulty. It replaces blue moblins with red or whatever ones are more difficult in various areas. So test out your skills. That's pretty much it from them. The big one, of course, is that since I've jumped ship from Microsoft to Sony, and I'll get to Microsoft in a second, but I'll do Sony's because I have the most about them because that was the one I was paying the most attention to. So first up, as I also hope for, and many fans as well, there's going to be Horizon Zero Dawn DLC, awesome, called The Frozen Wilds. Actually, quick side story, I just lent Ian Horizon Zero, and we're talking about it off-cast, enjoyed it. Next thing is something I've been calling for a while, and I believe I mentioned it in a couple episodes, is that they're porting Undertale, finally, to PS4.
Nice.
That's pretty awesome.
Nice.
And another big one that is a known game that people love, they're going to remake / remaster / whatever you want to call it, Shadow of the Colossus. They showed off a trailer for that, which looked really cool.
That was a big one.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was kind of that's sort of a surprise, hey, and everyone's yeah, fucking hey, awesome.
Did they all? Let me ask you. I'm sure you have this maybe down the list or something, but did they? I didn't see if they did this because I haven't been paying as much attention to the AAA games as I should be. But Did they talk about Final Fantasy VII at all?
They did not that I have.
Square Enix.
They basically haven't said anything more. Like it's still coming. From what I mentioned, so
it's not coming out till next year anyway.
Yeah. So quick sidebar on all just in general. I tried to find like a nice concise list of like the big major announcements and then dig through within that of what I was interested in. I could not find like no website that I normally go to, even beyond that, seemed to have a nice little breakdown of everything. It was all over the place. So yeah, as I said, these are going to be a little haphazard, but mostly stuff that I personally am interested in and overlaps with what the major announcements were.
Yeah.
So no, to answer your question, I didn't see anything at all within what I combed through about FF7.
Right.
As far as I know, it's on track, yeah, but they didn't show anything new. They didn't like say anything else about it. So, but another one sort of related. They did show a new God of War trailer. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I saw that.
Looking forward to that.
But who is he killing in that? Because he killed all the Greek gods already.
I think it's Viking. I believe it's the Norse mythology.
So they're just killing all the different cultures.
And going through every pantheon.
It's about his son, or his son is with Kratos, or something like that as well.
I can't wait to the Judeo-Christian God of War.
Sure. And two other
just one boss. That's it.
Oh, you fight Jesus and Mary Magdalene and whatever.
You have to fight him 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. You have to fight him 3 days later. There was something interesting. So I'm going to touch upon exclusives because they mentioned that there will be Destiny 2 exclusive content for PS4 through Sony. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it pisses people off. I've always said exclusives are kind of a dumb idea, but I get why they exist. So regardless, if you're a Destiny fan, and you'll get some more shit from Sony if you play it there on PS4 versus MS, I guess.
Yeah.
Then there's a new David Cage joint, if anyone cares or interested about that. It's called Detroit Become Human, which in my notes, based on what I've gathered from it, it's basically going to be something like Westworld and future Detroit. So you're becoming self-aware and like whatever Detroit's supposed to resemble or is going to look like at that point.
I would say tourists are going to Detroit. I mean, that's unbelievable.
We'll see. But that's all. That's basically all they have about it. Next is something called Days Gone, which looks like something I would be interested in. It's sort of open world survival horror-ish. Not much. Like Zombie Bear is a big thing that came out of that in the trailer. So if that grabs you, it looks okay, but the sensibilities of it speak to me. And finally, another somewhat surprise was they showed off a Spider-Man game that's going to be made by Insomniac that looks sort of Spider-Man but Arkham style, like Batman Arkham series gameplay-ish.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the big things from Sony.
I believe, not to dispute you here, Scott, but I believe they did a new Kingdom Hearts demo.
They probably did.
And
I know Kingdom Hearts is a big franchise, just not to me.
The only reason I know that is because I saw a picture of Goofy looking hard as fuck.
Sure.
And then I saw the caption under it said he's about to yuck you up.
I mean, that's awesome. I did not see that. But yeah, like Kingdom Hearts I was never really like big into it. So yeah, it's sort of a blindside. I believe you that
right.
I'm sure they did something with it, and specifically that I didn't see. But I mean, again, those are the major things from Sony that I was interested in that I picked out. So I'll move on to their big competitor, Microsoft. The first note I have is that they finally announced an official name for Project Scorpio, which has been in the works for a while. And if you guys haven't seen it, no one heard of it, it's like one of the biggest headlines from it. It will be called Xbox One X. And I have "fuck you"
good job, guys,
in my notes.
They really had the marketing team working hard on that one.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You spent a lot of money, time, and research coming up with that. But it'll be $500. Although, to be fair, it will be Xbox backwards compatible. So
nice.
That's kind of a cool bonus.
Maybe worth the extra $200.
Yeah, maybe hopefully finally now everyone realizes compatibility backwards is a good thing, and we should do it.
As long as you pay more. But you got to pay.
Of course. They also will have an exclusive. This is a game I actually did play back on the Xbox 360, State of Decay. There's a sequel coming out, which will be exclusive to them. So I may have to pick up, if not just for that game, but I mean, it's cool that they're making a sequel, but it will be exclusive to Microsoft, to Xbox. Crackdown 3, which they've announced before, but showed off a little bit more of that. I'm iffy about, like, it looks cool, I guess. Again, if I had one, if I was into it, maybe. Forza Motorsport 7, I know, again, that's a huge franchise, although not quite to me. But that is something they showed off. And finally, Metro Exodus, which is something I am interested in. I like the first 2 Metro games. This one was, they announced it at MS's, at their press conference, but it's not exclusive to MS, so it's sort of like, hey, we're sort of vaguely attached, but, not actually exclusive, which, again, I think is a good thing. And then I sort of start going down. EA, again, you know my feelings on EA and press in general. I have only 2 things. Star Wars Battlefront 2, they're going to have a solo campaign. Cool, great. And BioWare showed off a new game called Anthem. sort of like a cross between what I heard, like sort of somewhat not Mass Effect, Titanfall, and some other vaguely similar game to that, like fire on jetpacks. It's like a shooter.
Yeah,
looks okay. Again, I saw like a second of the trailer or so, and then finally, my other / love-hate relationship is Ubisoft. They did announce Far Cry 5 in advance of E3, and they showed off another trailer or two. I'm gonna get that game. I'm probably that's the franchise I like the most from them. So, especially given the quote-unquote controversy, given the setting that they've announced the details for, regardless, it looks good. I'm gonna get it. They also announced a new Assassin's Creed Origins set in Egypt, and they claim to be revamping the combat system. It's going to be actually more Soulsy, is what I heard. Like, not just like instant counter kill or whatever.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like,
sure.
So you know my feelings on
I understand.
Assassin's Creed.
I do.
Like, I don't trust them to do that right at all.
It may not be a perfect mirror, but they're trying to evolve the combat so it's more complex.
That's
and
good.
it will be made by the team, like the internal team who did Black Flag, which seems cool. Like that was one of the
I know
best,
you love
if
Black
not the
Flag,
best.
yeah.
What else? Actually, yeah, not a surprise announcement from them. Sort of sleeper was Beyond Good and Evil 2, which was an awesome game. It's got a kind of a cult following. They were like sort of development hell to the sequel for a while, so now it's officially happening, and that's quite cool. Two final things. South Park Fractured But Whole. Again, I did not play Stick of Truth, but that if you're
Stick
a fan,
of Truth
it
was
looks
apparently awesome, and Fractured But Whole, not only a good pun, but it's supposed to be a very good game.
Yeah, good follow.
I've heard.
South Park still exists.
Oh yeah.
Well, they're making a game based on it still, like, and I believe Trey and Matt
It's
are
more of a surprise
still
than
involved. Yeah, and finally, they announced something called Skull and Bones, which is a pirate themed PvP. So cool if you're into that. I am not. And again, yes, there were many other things. I know I'm like not covering every fucking thing, but those were the major things from the AAA studios that I follow, and of the games they announced, the ones that I'm most interested in. So that's pretty much it. I'll turn it over to one of you guys.
Well, Ian, if you don't mind me going first, I kind of would like to have your VR games featured a little bit, because I want to jump in a little bit on those.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in, and then we'll leave the last.
Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Steve-O, jump into the indie beat coverage.
So, I was looking through a lot of the indie games. A couple of the ones that I'm really excited about are games that have been in development for a while. Cuphead.
I saw that. Actually, I did see a bit of
which
that. Which
looks amazing. I saw something for this a while ago, and I kind of forgot about it, and then I saw it again when looking at the E3 coverage. And this game looks really cool. It's just like a Metroidvania style game, kind of, but with retro animation, like in the idea of like Steamboat Willie.
Yeah, but I heard like 1920s, 1930s cartoon style.
Yeah, and it looks great. I watched a couple of trailers for it and like videos about it, and it looks awesome. Another one that's been in development for a while that people have been talking about is Ashen. True. It's an open world survival game, survival combat and exploration game that features like passive multiplayer, passive co-player. It's similar to, I guess, Journey.
Yeah, okay.
In the way that like people can join you in Journey, but I think and like I read a little bit about this, but I'm not 100% sure. But like I think people can like join you in like solving puzzles and things like that.
That's cool.
Which sounds really interesting to me. And I really kind of want to see how that works out. Another one that people have been talking about for a while is Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which is the Castlevania
spiritual successor
that was I believe it was kickstarted, right?
And like 3 years ago or more, a while ago.
That just looks interesting. I hope it turns out better than some of the recent kickstarted,
like Mighty Number 9 stuff.
Mighty Number 9.
Sure.
Ukulele supposedly wasn't that great, so hopefully it turns out better than those games. There is a follow-up to the Ori game.
Yep.
Ori
saw that.
And Will of the Wisp and the Will of the Wisps, which is just a beautiful looking game. The
aesthetics are quite good.
It just looks incredible. And I never played the first game because I believe it was an Xbox exclusive when it came out on console.
Something like that, yeah.
And it was on I think it was out for PC first, but it just looks great, and I am interested in trying to pick it up and give it a go at some point, just because of the aesthetic of it. I don't. Well, we'll see how the gameplay turns out. Another one that's been getting a lot of heat is the Artful Escape, and
I've never heard of it.
It's by the developer Beethoven and Dinosaur. It's kind of a music/art focused platformer game.
Okay.
Where a lot of the mechanics have to do with playing guitar and just stuff like that. But it's kind of a 2D platformer on a 3D background type of game.
Okay. Nice.
Let's see what else we got here. Raiders of the Broken Planet by Mercury Steam. It's a sci-fi third-person shooter / melee game with single player and co-op campaigns. Those devs actually worked on one of the Castlevania games, and they're working on the new Metroid game.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
that should be interesting. Hopefully, well done. Sundered is a...
I heard a bit about it. Yeah, go on.
It's supposed to be similar to Super Metroid in terms of gameplay, but using quote-unquote Dark Souls duck and move combat flow. And one of the interesting things about this that I saw was that you have abilities that you gain throughout the game, and you're able to corrupt those abilities in order to make them stronger. So there's gonna be different endings for uncorrupted play and corrupted play, which I think is kind of cool. And it just looked the look of the aesthetic of the game looked really cool.
Sure.
The Darwin Project, which is
I heard it in passing. Yeah,
multiplayer combat described when I saw it, and I watched a trailer for this, and this is a good description. Team Fortress in the Canadian wilderness.
All right, nice.
Which looks kind of interesting.
Sure.
I don't know if I'll ever. I never played too much Team Fortress, but it was always kind of that game that was the game was that was up there. There's another game called Surviving Mars by Paradox Interactive.
Never heard of it.
That is basically you have to build a colony on Mars. What could go wrong?
Or
right?
I think I heard of that actually.
Yeah,
I was kind of excited.
That
about
one
it.
It looks very
cool,
interesting.
though.
I hope that they do it
does it-
as well as it seems like they're going to.
Is it like resource management style?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is resource management, and I believe so. The way it was described, which I think is kind of a bad description based on the trailer, but I guess we'll see, was the Martian inspired game.
Yeah.
But The Martian was all about one guy trying to survive. This is about trying to build a colony,
Full colony,
on Mars, which I think will be cool.
I like the concept for sure.
And I guess I would be remiss to not mention that there is a Life is Strange prequel coming out.
I was waiting for you to reluctantly fucking mention it.
Anybody who has been listening to Syntax Editor for a while knows that I do not like Life is Strange, but who knows? Maybe it'll be good.
I liked it.
Yeah, you and Scott liked it well enough.
Here's the thing. I find myself in the middle. As a quick tangent, you hated it. Ian thought it was pretty solid. I thought it was okay at best, but I didn't play all of it. But the thing is, it got a lot of awards. It got a lot of recognition.
It did.
So I see why they're making a sequel.
It allows me
or prequel, I guess.
To be fair to Life is Strange, I guess, which I'll try to be, I didn't get that far into it because the game lost me immediately.
because you're not in channel with your inner teenage girl.
No, I think this game is not in channel. I am very much in channel with my inner teenage girl. Life is Strange doesn't know what inner teenage
Either way,
girls
there's
are like.
some kind of disconnect. But regardless, they're making a prequel, and sure, that's vaguely interesting. Like I said in passing.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is it has a lot of. It's popular, and it was it was touted as being a well written game, regardless of what you think of it, a well done game. So.
Right. So that's not all of the indie games, but that's the ones that looked interesting to me, and I thought that perhaps I will play throughout this year.
And the highlights, sure.
And early next year, I believe. But the one that I'm most looking forward to, I will say, is Cuphead. That game looks awesome.
I probably will get that as well.
That's like the Shovel Knight from a couple years or a year or two ago.
Sure.
To me, I really want to play
I'm
that.
probably going to get
Yeah.
Cuphead as well, because it did look really good. That is one of the indie ones I did actually end up seeing.
But on that note, I'll turn it over to Ian, and Ian's going to talk about VR.
Well, I'm going to talk about the concept of VR because, unfortunately, and to a lot of people's disappointment, VR was underrepresented at E3. And actually, I saw some great interviews about VR, both like casual fans and developers who were there. And then another one, which was dealing with actual like academics and the business side of it and like where VR is going with that. So one of like the debates of the future of VR is whether it's just a momentary bubble or it's a gimmick or there's actually the future of gaming. And like some people like you can actually there's good arguments for both sides. And one argument for a person who wants to see VR become the actual like future of gaming said that there has to be games that are created for the strengths of VR and not just ports from actual games. Mm-hmm. So to bring up that point, the big news was Fallout 4, Skyrim, and Doom, which are just porting. And Doom I think is pretty good because first-person shooters are really
they should seem conducive to that. Yes,
but I don't like. Actually, someone had a point where she's like, "I put 200 hours into Skyrim the first time I played it." And he's like, he's saying, I was sitting on my couch in my underwear playing. Like, I don't see myself wearing a headset for 200 hours and playing through an RPG like that. Which is a fair point.
If I may, I think that's one of the biggest things that VR is going to have to contend with. You cannot play it in its current state for too long. It's way more intense than playing a regular video game.
Exactly. Versus
and we've all experienced this. Like in the lowest realm of VR.
Yeah, and you can check out our episode about
we got the Gear VR headsets and played on our phones, and it's draining. Like it feels like a long time. Like whereas most video games, like not to say that it's not fun, but like most video games when you're playing them, you lose track of time. In VR, you're like, oh, what was that, like 2 hours? And they're like, you've been playing for 25 minutes, man. Yeah. Like, VR is draining. It takes a lot to play it.
So the other interview I did was, I'm actually going to put the link in the description, which is Engadget, Where is VR Headed? Which is actually kind of a shop talk between the academics and the business side of it. And saying that, like, in a way, VR is new to consumers now, but it's been in development for like decades. And there's an academic, I believe, who was working on it since 2002, and talking about how, like, we've already kind of we've addressed problems that you didn't even know had occurred back in the day. Yeah, but one of the problems they address is that the consumers can't differentiate between all the VR tech out there. And I mean, that is fair. There's a huge differentiation between whether you get a Sony one for a PlayStation, whether you get a private company, whether you get the Samsung phone gadget. There's all these different things, and like with different price ranges. And so they came up with 4 points for VR to be successful, which is 1, a dominant system needs to arise that is accessible to consumers. There has to be that one game that people need to play, so they buy the product.
Yeah, well, and I think those two are inextricably linked. Like whatever one is going to be the other, I would say. Yes. Probably.
I agree. And then there needs to be a standardization, so for developers as well as just consumers. And there has to be also a minimization of accessibility for the hardware. That make the goggles in a sense less burdensome to wear.
Yeah.
And then the big thing is that AR, they say AR is more likely to take over than VR because AR seems more like it's less of a logical leap for people to use AR than it is to use VR.
I would say, sorry to interrupt again, but I would say that AR, I think, will take over in terms of things other than games. As far as games go, I think VR has a leg up. At least in the long run.
Pokemon Go, which is AR, is
sure, but how much of a downturn did that take after the first 2 weeks? You know,
it was gimmicky.
Right. Two things. This is going to be an episode unto itself, which we will cover later on, because we can't cover it all right now because it's a very complex and interesting question for sure. We've danced around, if not touched upon it, in our previous VR eps when it's come up. Is that yes? I guess my 2 cents is that I feel as AR has always been a stepping stone to VR. Maybe not a one-to-one leap, but for example, things like educational tools. You can still have AR in education tools. Like if you're performing a task with a display, we'll say.
But you can have VR in that too. I think that it's,
of course.
But I think that's a difference in usage, right? Like AR is very much more useful and easy to use. Like if you're using VR for something that you're training for that you have to put a ton of hours into.
Sure, no, I get it.
I think that's going to be a lot more burdensome than using AR for something like that.
They're saying that though VR's future is in the practical use of it to teach people to use, like for medical surgery, to do like there's actually an example of they're teaching people how to tile through VR programs.
True.
Sure. So there's that part. But onto the games though in E3, I already mentioned the
sort of
Bethesda's
the big three.
ones.
Yeah.
Actually, Microsoft was interestingly absent in VR. I don't believe they're going to have. They, as of right now, they don't have a compatible for the Xbox One X or whatever.
Yeah, Xbox One X, One X times 5. Anyway,
let's see. So they had actually Ubisoft is coming out with 2 interesting games.
X-Boinks. I'm going to call it that.
One is Transference with Elijah Wood, and it's sort of a psychological thriller type thing.
It looked interesting.
Yeah,
we caught the trailer just before the up, and
I definitely like of all the trailers I saw, that was the one that really kind of made me want to purchase the VR thing. Right. They also have one called Space Junkies, which is not about heroin users on.
Unfortunately, it is not.
What the hell, man?
But I was excited about that too.
It's a 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2 combat in kind of a anti-gravity environment, which is pretty neat. There is, and then Sony is coming out with a bunch, but a couple of them were Inpatient, which was sort of Shutter Island, the VR game.
That's what the trailer made it seem like, for sure. Something like that. Yeah.
Super Hot VR, which you recognize,
what?
Scott.
Yeah.
Is that porn? Is that
no?
VR
I mean,
porn?
like Super Hot was a ironically, like or not, like a very popular hot indie game, if you will. So it had like a very nice, like neat core mechanic, and it lends itself to being adapted to VR. I feel.
What kind of game was that?
So it's sort of like a you're a polygon and you're shooting polygons, but when you move, the enemies move, and when you stop, they stop. And you're that seems like interesting to try in the VR environment.
Yeah.
And then the last one I have to say is a game called Moss, which was really neat to read about because the person was trying to develop a game for like that goes to the strength of VR and addresses the limitations that exist. Now it's Zelda-like. It seems like a fun kind of like
overworld
youthful adventure type thing, but again, but the manipulation of objects with the controller is what he was strong thing. But that's like about VR. Mostly, like again, a lot of like Oculus, I believe, didn't show up with anything new.
I don't think so.
What were they even there for?
They weren't like
they just didn't show up.
Oh yeah, and like again, Microsoft decided not to Sony
like
put 10 minutes into their entire like VR program.
Portfolio,
so again, though, some people were saying, "Oh, it's going to be a couple of years yet before it starts to take on." But in 2017, it was underrepresented.
Yeah,
I think. Well, I was going to say
real quickly. I just want to say, like, it seems as if leading up to E3, many fans and industry people expected like more to come out of the VR sector. So like they were like, "Oh, the reason you haven't heard much is because they're saving it for E3." But apparently,
I think what's really going to need to happen
there wasn't
is
much
at one of these big conferences, E3 or PAX or something. One of these companies is going to have to step up and be like, "Look, here's what we're developing. This is like our most exciting stuff. If you have VR, you're going to love this." Like I really don't want to.
It hasn't happened yet, or at least not.
I really don't
want
to see VR go the way of like, Jaguar or Game Boy VR.
I don't think it will, but
I don't think it will either. But
a discussion for another day.
It is really whether it's just a gimmick, or whether it's just a bubble right now, or whether it's the future of gaming, and like that's what took up most of the conversation about VR in E3, which is not a good sign.
I'll say this based on what I've played. If they came out. And I'll say this: what I've played is fun. They have not come out with a
killer app.
Great game
of course.
yet for VR.
Yes,
at least from what I've played. And there's a lot of fun stuff going on, and there's a lot of strengths to VR that, as you mentioned, Ian, need to be played to. And I think that they need to stop thinking about these games in terms of like, how can we make a AAA Xbox VR game? And start thinking about how can we make a AAA VR Xbox game, if that makes any sense.
Sure,
right? You need to put the VR first in order to make this great game. You need to commit to
capitalize on it.
Transference could be it, because I was really impressed by what I saw from it.
I hope like even with the meager offerings that seem to be on display at the Series E3 and somewhat of disappointment to people looking forward to it in general, something like that, if not that one itself, could be the thing that kicks that sparks everything off.
That's really what they need, I think.
Yeah.
I think they need something that gets a lot of people into it. It's going to be like the Halo of VR,
sure,
or like
exactly.
the Super Mario Brothers of VR, or even going into other like things like the Serial. How Serial made podcasting exciting, right? They need that.
So besides the first-person shooters, there's actually an interesting idea that like the Mortal Kombats or something like that being VR, which would
from a first-person view.
Kind of a fighting, like a boxing type thing or a Mortal Kombat type thing, would be a potential avenue to explore with it. I think that's pretty neat.
I'd like to see that for sure, and I think it does have potential. I agree.
As long as they replicate being punched in the face accurately.
As long as they can fatality people.
That's going to be the issue. I mean, we've already talked about this in previous episodes, but like, if you don't have a 1-to-1 movement ratio, some people get sick, and that's where you run into issues.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But I mean,
if you get hit in the face, you're gonna have to like slam back.
I did forget one interview, which I just want to bring up briefly, which was a person discussing bringing VR to like people who might have mobility issues.
And that's a very important avenue as well.
So it was a neat conversation.
That's actually an interesting point that you bring up, and I will bring up somebody that I am acquaintances with who a couple years ago was got into a bad accident and is now unable to use most of his body, and he's been talking about trying to get VR games to work, but he can't use his hands very well, and he wants to know like so he was like asking about VR games that could work for somebody like that.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I pointed him towards Monument Valley. No, not Monument Valley.
Land's End or whatever.
Land's End is the Monument Valley is the other game that company made,
mm-hmm.
but Land's End is the VR game, and it's just kind of like look and point and move to that situation. So I think that would be very interesting for people that have limited mobility and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. Again, unexplored avenues. It's just that seemingly it's somewhat of a vague disappointment that there wasn't more coming out of this year's E3.
Yeah,
absolutely.
At least in terms of like product. But again, the discussions around it certainly are interesting and are rife for like exploring.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully more discussions like this right now are happening.
And we will have more.
And that
as it
gets
evolves,
developers to kind of look more into it, be more interested, because there are people interested in moving in that direction in terms of gaming.
Exactly.
Aside from the Microsoft president who says he doesn't see much demand for it.
Fuck that guy.
Yes, well.
Fuck you, Microsoft president who doesn't see much in that direction.
If they ever catch us, then they'll know.
Yeah, what's he going to do?
So,
I might be dead next year at this
we'll
time. I might not be here for next E3 roundup.
All right. Well, thankfully you were here for this one.
Yeah.
Anything else we forgot? Anyone want to mention? Or
I think that's it. That's all I had notes on.
Yeah, so like I said, this has been our Syntax Error coverage of E3, as biased as we are, and the things we thought were interesting and important to mention. And, if you missed it somehow and are catching up, like, delve into more. If anything I said interests you, check out the trailers for them. There's some excellent trailers. We didn't have time to go through them all. But like I said, that's pretty much the E3 2017 wrap up, and what we explored and reported on, if you will. I call us journalists in a vague sense.
Don't do the quotation marks. That makes us look like assholes.
I'm doing quotes. But maybe next year we'll be there. But either way, I think that'll do it for tonight's episode. I, of course, have been Scott Thurlow, here with Stephen Amosi.
Have a good night.
And Jane Manzer.
I'm going to go back to my disappointing virtual reality.
Yes, and me as well. See you next time.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow. Music by Stephen Hermosi. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.